like Rabbi Ezra of Girona, I think, said, the philosophers and the Kabbalim say the same thing. They just call them by different names.
Right.
And maybe it makes a big difference what name you call things. That's a different question. But my big contention has been that my problem, 2023, or maybe like since 1773, whatever, hasn't been about the names. It's about the ideas, or about like the more basic ways of thinking, or more basic metaphysics. And somehow there needs to be a way to show how, well, these two different things, which keep on getting stuck in. One is that like all of these concepts make no sense. uh, and the other one is, given certain concepts or certain basic ways of thinking, or maybe certain ways of showing how other ways of thinking are inadequate or not as useful for certain purposes, then that should work out to a system that looks something like this, or has some features of this, or maybe a different one. What do I know?
Yeah.
Anyways, like I feel like many people, for example, study Kabbalah and end up learning a system. Like we have all these structures, this and this and that, and then somewhat useful for them to like map the world onto that, or map different things onto that. And that seems to be one way of teaching something. Like it could be that it's easier to teach a system. Like I could tell you, okay, so we have this 17 levels, and each one has 35 different parts and interact in such and such ways. Maybe that is a way of teaching, or maybe there's like a more philosophical way of teaching, which has to do with like, let's actually think of what a cause is or what an explanation is, and maybe that will force you to make such a system. I'm not sure. Maybe there are two totally different works that need different kinds of thinking or different kinds of imagination. I don't know.
I understand your question, or your set of questions. So let me say a few things. First of all, I think the names are important for what you're talking about. And that's my beef with Dodds and also with other people, because he doesn't translate in a way that the names mean what they mean in the Greek. So, for instance, participate. He uses participate for metaphysics. And that is, we've seen it means like to have a property, right? But participate doesn't mean that in English. Participate means to participate in activity, right? I participated in a discussion. I did something together with other things. Sure, there's a reason why this became like the jargon in philosophy. Once it, if you go to the etymology, it means to have a part of something, to take a part, and then it makes sense. But when you say it, you can't, start a conversation in English saying, let's talk about participation. What does it mean to participate in something and arrive at this theory? Because participation means something else. And so I think really for us to be able to understand this, we have to use words that mean what the concepts mean. And that's what I've tried to do in my translation, but I did it into Portuguese, which is why we're not using it. But that's also like why I use these things. Like I bring other words. So I say, he's translating this as providence, but it's charity, really, things like that. So I think that's important for us to, not for this not to be an empty shell game. It's just a system where you move things and you learn the system. If for philosophy to be, philosophy about the world we live in, we have to use the words that we use on our day-to-day basis. This is also why it's important to do philosophy in your own language, right? Um, but but in your own language means in your own language, really, not like Greek dressing up as English, but English that means the English, what English means. But going forward, you point, the general problems like, oh, modernity, whatever. None of this is true anymore. I think that there are modern ways of thought that help us understand this. I think especially that German philosophy that was born from Kant is crucial in this. So, for instance, Kant has an argument for why you have to presume that there is constant causal interaction between all things, which is basically also in Proclus, and it's Proclus' argument for why there has to be universal cosmic sympathy, and the world is a single living being. And Kant and later Fichte, Schelling, Hegel, they were looking for the kinds of grounds of, what Proclus calls a cause, a productive cause, the explanation for existence, for being, that is interested in Proclus, that Proclus and other people were interested in. There are differences, of course, but I think that this, certainly helps us get a grasp on things. And there's something that Kant said, that, Kant did, and that was then continued later, which was that he said, all our concepts are only true about the world of experience. And he had a very narrow idea about what experience was, and he was like really excited about Newton, his explanation of the physical world. But later, with Husserl and Heidegger, so phenomenology, you get this approach of, we have to ground our concepts in experience in a broad sense, in anything that happens to us. So like having, proving a theorem is part of our experience, and the religious manifestation is part of our experience too. And not every experience is universal, right? So you have to be a certain kind of person to have certain kinds of experiences. And I think that's something that's true about a lot of this metaphysics, and especially when you get to the cosmology. When you get to the cosmology, and then there's like tons of, the idea that there's this immutable heavens, and that we're in the changeable area. I think that this is not true physically, right? We can see that, stars change, and we see the shape of Saturn and the shape of Pluto. And I mean, we know about Pluto. He didn't. These are so. Although lots of this stuff isn't physically true, it can still be true about the world of experience. And this takes effort. I mean, we have to figure out how to translate these things that for Proclus were just, physical truths into equivalence in our experience. But I think it's a project that can be done. Can everything be saved? I don't think everything was saved back then, right? Proclus is just a guy, and there are, as you mentioned, there are holes in some arguments and some things. He's like doesn't give the best explanation for some contradiction or tension, and there are problems with this system. So, it wasn't done back then, so it's not that much of a problem that if you can't, not everything turns out that we don't find out that we agree perfectly with Proclus and we can understand everything. It's fine, but what's exciting for me, I mean, everything I've been talking about is exciting for me. I think Proclus is interesting because it does explain things about the world and existence for me, but also just because he is a systematic polytheist philosopher and pagan, and he believes in all these things, not just that there are many gods, but he wants to explain why there are sacred places and why there are sacred things, and how rituals work, and how there are spirits and how spirits interact with us, and how there are past lives and all that. And once you master one systematic explanation, then I think all the material that you find that includes this, you no longer have to say, oh, that's just window dressing, oh, that's just an extra part. No, once you know one, systematic explanation from this point of view, then you can it's not that you should import this then immediately to any other thing. It's not that you should import Proclus all over into Plato, although that's what Proclus thought, right? That he was just interpreting Plato. But when you run across something in Plato about Zeus or Aphrodite, you say, no, wait, there's a way to be intellectually serious about this. You shouldn't, we don't have to throw it away. We can include that in our interpretation somehow. And so that's, like a real value that I think of, you know, mastering the system independent of the things that I've talked about, interpreting it in terms of the world of experience and finding the right words to connect it with the world that we live in. So that's my spiel about, yeah, we can understand this.
Okay.
And I hope that you've come up with so far with the course so far, you've come a few steps closer to understanding it. But yeah,
Yeah, some things need
some
to spend
things.
a lot of more time.
Yeah. Um,
And
okay,
yeah, and
so
also translate into something.
yeah, yeah.
Because like there's all these little groups of people throughout history that are like sitting in their cave somewhere and writing things in Aramaic and like translating things that they're thinking and reading and pushing it into text and out of texts, and then we're all like, okay. Like, and yeah, I think they're all just people trying to think, but like it seems to be important. Oh, the Zohar has this thing about ויקרא להם שמות כשמות אשר קרא להן אביו. So, and he has this like explicit polemic with someone, I'm not sure with who, but it says like Yitzchak had these wells that he gave them the same names that his father gave to the wells that he had, or something like that. And he uses that as a kind of image for like, we should stop using all these Gentile words, and we should like you have to use the correct words or the traditional words for them. But turns out that that's even more problematic, because then all the traditional people think you're talking about what they're talking about, and you're not. It's like when the Zohar says Abraham, he means something, some kind of Sephira. It doesn't mean anything about Abraham. But he's very much insistent on using like those vessels or those words.
yeah.
And then
So
we're like, I don't know.
so that's something that we have to be clear about what are we using the words for. So Proclus uses the words of the Greek philosophical tradition. And he does it because he wants to participate in it, and he wants to argue with Aristotle and he wants to agree with Plato, and so he uses the words even when they don't really match. So pronoia, providence, is a clear case, right? He doesn't mean some kind of prior plan, even though that's what the word means. When he uses an etymology, I tweeted about this the other day. When he uses an etymology and says, for instance, that it's pro noia, so it's before nous, that's an actual. What he means is, I want this to mean something else. I'm going to twist the word and make it mean something else.
Yeah.
And so that's what he was doing. What we're doing with the words is something different, or what I'm doing with the words, at least, something different. I want to use words not to participate in the Greek philosophical tradition or to participate in the discussion now among scholars about the Greek philosophical tradition. I mainly wanted to use it to discuss with metaphysicians, to discuss with other people, with ordinary people who are interested in questions about the soul and reality and so on. And so, what are the words that we use to talk about reality? And this is not what Proclus wanted to do, because Proclus wasn't talking to people speaking in English in the 21st century, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was talking to people, to a really select, really small group of people reading and writing in Greek in the 5th century. So this is, and there are objectives that are irreconcilable. And that's why, translation is always betrayal. because someone want to say, oh, well, maybe because, Proclus was thinking about the world and he was participating in the tradition at the same time. And so we should try to find words that do both. But, it's just languages change and you can't do both, and the the languages that we are using now um, are things that put us in touch with reality. But languages that are traditions for us are no longer direct contacts with reality. You know, once the and I think that's one of the main reasons why we can't really find perfect translations for things. Um, and it's I mean it's so I think it's so I mentioned now about importance of doing philosophy with your mother tongue, and that goes in part with what with the injunction you said of let's use our traditional terms, but the way you match them isn't can't be mechanical. It has to be you understand the Greek term, and then you understand the English words. You find what two things mean the same thing, not like what two things have the same etymological origin, like providence and pronoia. And um, but yeah, it's a can of worms.
I understand. Okay, yeah.